Just a quick pointer pointing to my last video where I explained things. A couple of things I forgot to mention. First one, which I will just show now, you can't actually put anything in here. No matter how hard I try, it won't let me. But if I fill this up, then it acts like an inventory space, so you can't accidentally delete items. Completely forgot about that, and sorry on that one. Secondly, these inventory slots are only numbered so that I can organize them in the code, so it's first one, second, third, fourth, etc. That's just for organizing them, because otherwise it does it completely randomly when finding them. It's a bit messy. Third thing, these items don't actually have any sort of script on them. They're completely normal game objects, and if it were not for the fact that they have a canvas and text item, they're just any old game object. The only thing that makes it require the canvas and text is just because that's how it displays how many of each item it's got. I'll probably add something later on for that, which I'll edit in the code, but essentially those are just some things I wanted to point out on my last video. So this item, the only thing special about it, apart from this canvas, which is just a stock standard everyday canvas, is the fact that it's tagged with item. That's the only thing. I can, in theory, just grab, I don't know, a cylinder, for example, center it, and in theory, if I were to tilt it just because I can, I tag it as item, put on a canvas with an item counter, and magic as it is, as soon as I call it something like, I don't know, item 9, put it in here. I just use this to initialize everything. And in theory, hold on, yeah, it's just my example script. So in theory, now when I press play, there we go. You can move it around like any other game object. Now, of course, that's a pretty extreme example, but it's just showing that anything with the tag item has a canvas and some sort of item counter with the tag item counter, which is just a standard text item, can be used as an item. This is really handy. So yeah, the general idea of this was just so that anyone can use anything they want. And in case you're wondering why it's not showing up, it's just because I ticked this off. Essentially, I like to keep my example code away from everything else. So, when I open this, essentially this is just the test script to show you that, hey, you know, you've picked up a certain amount of items. So this is just a whole heap of game objects that I slapped on. That's all of these, excluding this one now because I added that. If you can see, I just drag that across, and now it'll act as though it's a perfectly normal object. Integer and float, again, that's just how many of each you want to spawn in, what the weight is. These are all unnecessary if you've got an actual game. This is just to show, and just a list of the game objects. And when it starts, it just sets it to layer 2, which just means that the items are on ignore raycast. I forgot to mention that as well, just so that you can actually click these cubes without having to worry about clicking the item instead. Then it just changes the color to whatever. Again, this would be just any old texture, and your object, if it's in the world, would already have all of this set out, so you don't have to worry about this. This just makes a copy of each of these objects, like I said, with these items. They're completely invisible, but you don't really want to use them because the crafting system still needs that data. So it makes a copy of them, changes their name to the same thing, otherwise it comes up with clone or copy for some reason, and then just it goes through, accesses the mouse controller script, and if I can find it, yep, here it is, add to inventory slot. So essentially it just calls this function with each of these. So it goes, hey, item 1, which is this example item here, we just want to add that to the inventory with this amount and this weight. Nice and simple. And in here, it essentially just says, well, if this item, or it goes through every single inventory slot and says, if there's a free slot, put it in. If there is a full slot, but it contains the same item type, then just add that number of items. Number is nice and simple. So just add to inventory slot. Now again, most of this is all completely unnecessary. It's just to spawn in some objects in the world. If they're already spawned into the world, you don't have to worry about that. So all you would have to do is when your player walks over it, it just calls this with whatever the game object is that you want to be turned into an item, the item amount, and item weight. And in here in void update, essentially I have forgotten, oh that's right, this was something I was messing with, where if I just press the middle button, it just creates another copy of something, which, if it still works, I'm not sure if it does. Yeah, it just, when I middle click, it automatically creates more. And as you can see, whenever I add to it, it automatically fills in there. Now, something I seem to have forgotten is, yeah, it comes up item 9, comma, or bracket clone. Technically it's a different name to this, so it classifies it as different. However, if I were to instead do this, so essentially instead of using just instantiate, instead I'd make a copy just like I was before, but then set the name. In theory, when I go back to this, if it hasn't crashed, restart it, and whenever I click the middle button, it automatically does that. As you can see, as long as you've got the actual item you want to move across, which this is just a copy in this case, but in the actual game you would have the object. Essentially, as long as it's got the same name and you pass it the object, all you need to do is call this. All of this is completely unnecessary. I just used it to spawn something in. So essentially all you have to do is when the player walks over an item, it just calls this. Passes this item off to the mouse controller, which automatically figures everything out, how much there is, and weight. So essentially, if there was some event like this, which is called whenever your player collects these items, essentially it would just be this. Mouse controller. Now I know this isn't very effective. Most people would use the mouse controller in the start statement, but since this is just the example scene, I'll just ignore it. And yeah, essentially, game object, perfectly normal. And in here, you would just put whatever the game object is you want, which in this case doesn't exist because I haven't stated it, but whatever it is, the game object you're putting in, how much, and its weight. Simple as that. That's all you have to do, and the system will automatically figure it out. So, those were just some things I wanted to clear up from my previous video. Seems as though this one's gone on for long enough, so I will catch you later then.